Analysis of voter turnout in this week's election has already begun, and one of the demographics being closely examined, Hispanic voters. A new national survey of the electorate conducted by AP Votecast finds that while roughly two-thirds of Hispanic voters supported Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, President Donald Trump was able to garner a little more than one-third of the Hispanic vote nationally, cutting into Biden's support in competitive states like Florida and Nevada. Joining me now on Skype with his analysis is Alfonso Aguilar, president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Alfonso, welcome back. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure to be with you.
So there's a tendency to talk about the Hispanic vote as kind of a monolith, but certainly we know that is not the case. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, absolutely. It's not a monolithic group. Hispanics are the Hispanic community is a very diverse community. It varies depending on country of origin, in which state they live. So it's really varied. There's a significant percentage of the Hispanic population that's very conservative. The majority of Hispanics are pro-life. They believe that religious freedom is extremely important and should be defended. So I think President Trump did a great job in really making great inroads with the Hispanic community, particularly in key battleground states. As you mentioned, Florida, he got 47% of the Hispanic vote. Georgia, he got over 40%. And in Texas, 40% as well. Even in Arizona, which we're not sure if he's going to end up winning or not, he got 36% of the Hispanic vote. So that's pretty impressive. And it shows that when you have an integrated message, one of economic populism, of defending the right to life and religious freedom, that Hispanics are going to respond well.
Alfonso, in your opinion, do you think the Democratic Party underestimated that diversity that we were talking about and diversity of thought within the community this election cycle, considering those inroads that Republicans, especially President Trump, was able to make?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they'll publicly say that the Hispanic community is not monolithic, but they treat the Hispanic community as if it was. They believe that it's a solid electoral bloc that shares the same views. And as I've just outlined, it just really it doesn't. I mean, there are certainly Hispanics who tend to be more liberal in places like California and New York. But that's the case for most Americans, right? So it's a very diverse community. Donald Trump also was able to make inroads because of his policies and his achievements. So let's remember that he brought Hispanic unemployment to a historic low, but also the poverty rate among the Hispanic community to a historic low. So we had hundreds of thousands or even millions of Hispanics leaving the welfare rolls and entering the middle class. Those are great news for Hispanics who come here to achieve the American dream.
I want to go back to Florida again and take maybe more of a closer look. What do you think made the difference there, and why do you think the Trump campaign was able to connect with Hispanic voters in a way that the Biden campaign didn't? I know you mentioned a little bit, but can you expand on that a little more?
Right. Well, Democrats are going to dismiss it, saying that it was just because of the Cuban community, but that's not true. To get to 47% of the Hispanic vote, you have to do well in Florida with non-Hispanics as well. And by that, I mean Venezuelans, Puerto Ricans, Colombians, and Nicaraguans. His policy towards Latin America was phenomenal, reversing the policy of normalization of the Obama administration, which actually helped consolidate the communist regime in Cuba and allowed the communist regime in Cuba to more effectively intervene in Venezuela, propping up the Nicolas Maduro regime. So I think those Hispanic voters in Florida that follow closely the politics of their home country really responded well to President Trump's agenda. And let's remember that Vice President Biden has already said that if he ends up in the White House, he would go back to the policy of normalization towards Cuba.
Well, Alfonso, we don't have a lot of time left, but just wondering, any final thoughts when it comes to this election and what's happening right now?
Well, whatever they may say, if the president ends up losing a state like Arizona, it's not because of the Hispanic vote. He did very well with Hispanics. His message resonates with Hispanic voters. And I think that it's very important to understand that so as not to say that some of the states are turning blue because of Hispanics. If we continue with an integrated message that is pro-life, supportive of religious freedom and economic populism, will continue to garner more support from the Hispanic community.
Well, Alfonso, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your analysis.
Thank you for having me.